Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you all are having a wonderful day. So yeah, we've got another Warhammer 40k video we're going to check out here. Another one by Arbitor Ian. This one is called the Horus Heresy tier list, but lower. Which legion was the strongest at the end of the Crusade? Which is actually something that I've kind of thought about and wondered, you know, literally, at the end of the Crusade, which legion was the strongest? Which legion was in the best position? I feel like it was the Ultramarines and Guilliman, but maybe I'm wrong. So yeah, let's check this out. Again, by Arbitor Ian. As always, links below, down in the info section, description, whatever you want to call it, for Arbitor Ian's channel and this original video without my reaction to commentary. So if you want to check that out, I would highly recommend you go over there and at least give this video a like, give him a sub in the channel if you want to. He's a great content creator. He makes a lot of great stuff. So yeah, I would highly recommend you go over there and check out his stuff. But for now, let's just check out this video and see who at the end of the Horus Heresy was strongest. Or at least who was the strongest at the Great Crusade. Okay. I was thinking who was the strongest at the end of the Horus Heresy, but I guess that the Crusade would be like the end of the Crusade before the Heresy started. Anyway, let's check it out. Let's see what we got going on here. Good to go there.
Hey, Heresy players, do you want to know what the best legions are? Who has the best traits and the most powerful abilities so you can dominate on the tabletop? Yeah, sorry, I don't care. No, in this video, we're going to build a tier list for the legions.
I kind of would like to know that, though, too.
Based on the lore. At the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, which legions were the most and the least powerful?
Okay. Again, I kind of think it would be like the Ultramarines. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Trying to think of who it would be. I don't think it would be the Dark Angels. Maybe Dorn. And actually, at the start of the Heresy, it might actually just be the Luna Wolves. It could be the Luna Wolves and Dorn. It could actually be between those two, I think, now that I'm thinking about it. For who would be the strongest, having the most Marines, etc., etc. It would probably be either Horus or Dorn. The Luna Wolves or the Iron Fists. I think it's the Iron Fists. I could be getting Dorn stuff mixed up with someone else. Anyway, let's see what he says here.
So, how can we accurately measure the strength of a legion? Well, in the old Horus Heresy Black Books, they actually give us numbers. Usually just the estimated number of legionnaires, but also often the estimated size and composition of their fleets, as well as anything else we should know, like access to specific technologies or specialist weapons. It even outright states sometimes which legions were considered to be mid-tier at the time. And this changed a bit over the course of the Great Crusade, as legions were ravaged by war or bolstered by new recruits. And
there are certain legions were, you know, weakened by having to fight other Xenos, etc., you know, so some were stronger than others.
Also, once the heresy started, as Horus's initial moves played out. So in this video, we're going to create a tier list for two specific points. First, the strength of the 18 legions just before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, and then how that changed after the initial big battles at Prospero, Calth, and Istvan. Okay,
that's cool. So essentially it's, yeah, like, what were they before the heresy started, and kind of like what were they at the height of the heresy, I think. I feel like Istvan 5 was like the big start of the heresy when, you know, they killed off all the loyalist factions, the loyalist troops in their own legions, and then it was like official, the heresy is on. So okay, that's cool.
Hey, here's the
I like that idea.
I'll be ranking the legions from A to D tier, with traditional S tier for the really powerful ones, and just so you know, I'm mostly basing this on numbers of legionnaires, with other factors shifting them up or down a tier depending what they are. The range we're talking about is pretty big, but at the start of the heresy, the smallest legions tended to be just under 100,000 legionnaires in total, spread out across the galaxy, while the really big ones could be more than double that. So I've split that across our 5 tiers, but we'll see what happens when we go.
Makes sense.
Right, I'll run through.
Because I mean, it would probably be pretty hard to judge by like fighting prowess of the individual legionnaires, fighting prowess of the various captains, their tactical ability, their leadership, how well they actually lead troops in battle. And then, of course, the various Primarchs and whether or not, you know, which one's better at dueling, which one's better tactician, you know, which one's better at fighting, you know, I guess against multiple people in the field of battle kind of a situation. So
through them in Legion order. In the very early days of the Crusade, the Dark Angels were by far the biggest legion, with one of the biggest and most powerful fleets, but the Rangdan Xenocides and other wars earlier in the Crusade had left them badly mauled, and they'd lost a bit of their prominence over the latter.
And didn't, maybe I'm mistaken, but didn't also some of the legions have, were kind of still recouping from the big battle at Olinar? With the orcs? I think it's the orcs. There's so much lore that I get things mixed up. I really need to like go over it a few times before it really sticks in my brain.
Crusade had left them badly mauled, and they'd lost a bit of their prominence over the latter part of the Crusade. Even so, by the time the heresy broke out, they were still numbered at just under 200,000 legionnaires, which is huge. That still made them one of the biggest legions by a big margin. Plus, as the first legion, they'd been given access to ships.
This looks like something straight out of Command and Conquer. I wonder if, like the Tesla tanks or whatever in Red Alert 2, were based off some of these designs. Because like the I think it was Tesla tanks in Red Alert 2, right now Red Alert 3. But yeah, the just looks like something that's just straight out of Command and Conquer. I really actually like the design of this kind of tank, this with this like plasma coil, you know, cannon or whatever. I don't know, it just looks dope.
One of the biggest legions by a big margin. Plus, as the first legion, they'd been given access to ships and weaponry none of the others were allowed. So at the start of this war, they were easily one of the strongest legions. Their numbers alone would have put them in the A category, but with the crazy weapons and ancient fleet, well, I'm not sure how tier lists are meant to go, but we're starting off with an S. The Dark Angels are S tier.
Yeah.
Right. Probably shouldn't have done this in Legion order.
They've said that numerous times that at the beginning they were the legion that every other legion was based off of. So and yeah, because they were the first and the best at the time, they got to play with all the new experimental technologies and whatnot, like he's talking about. So over time they dwindled down though, from what I understand, and other legions took them over because they were always kind of like on the front line of the Crusades, so they lost a lot of troops and a lot of different wars and a lot of different planets, etc., etc., from my understanding and remembrance.
Anyway, let's return to normality for a bit. The Emperor's children had suffered early in the Crusade from a gene seed blight that stopped them from growing, but they'd come back from that and built themselves back up to a pretty respectable 110,000.
Honestly, pretty crazy how well Fulgrim did with building his troops, with what little he had to start with compared to the other Primarchs.
From that and built themselves back up to a pretty respectable 110,000 legionnaires with an attendant fleet. They may well have thought of themselves as perfect, but that only really gets them a C grade when compared to the rest. The 4th Legion, however, the Iron Warriors, had the opposite story. Their gene seed was so stable they'd always been one of the largest legions, but over the course of the Crusade, they'd been deployed into so many attrition campaigns that it had started to take a toll on their numbers. Even so, at the start of the Heresy, they were estimated at between...
See, that looks like a mammoth tank. Again, that looks like a mammoth tank from Command & Conquer, man. Like the dual cannons, just the kind of like overall build of it. If this had like missile pods on the side, this would be straight up mammoth tank. Anyway,
to take it.
If you can't tell, I loved Command and Conquer. It was the Command and Conquer Tiberian War series, and then the Red Alert series, and even Generals. They were some of my favorite real-time strategy games going up. At the very least, I wish EA would remaster and re-release the old ones like they did with the original. I would like to see, you know, they did the original Command & Conquer and Red Alert. I would like to see, you know, Command & Conquer 2 and 3 and Generals and Red Alert, you know, 2 and Yuri's Revenge. be, you know, re-updated and easier to access on modern computers and easier to run on modern computers, and with a nice, you know, graphical update. Because I love those games. They're still classics, and I would play them still if just that some of them are kind of a pain in the ass to get running properly. Anyway,
toll on their numbers. Even so, at the start of the heresy, they were estimated at between 150 and 180,000 legionnaires, along with more armored support and a much greater pool of recruits than any of the other legions, which puts them firmly in the A tier as one of the strongest legions.
Okay.
Next up, it's the White Scars. They'd spend a lot of the Crusade far away from
my boy Jagatai
power, and they had a pretty good fleet, which had been modified extensively. But however good it was, they were never that big as a legion, barely topping 90,000 legionnaires, which means that although they're my favorite, they're also our first D tier. Now,
interesting.
A controversial one.
Okay, so yeah, he's just straight up like going off of numbers. And I mean, numbers are a big deal. The more Marines you have, the more resources you can put towards various wars and campaigns and, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
The Space Wolves have been known as the Emperor's
execution. My boys, the Space Wolves.
Even if it was mostly just them saying that. And their entry in the Black Books notes the aura of fear that came with them as being particularly potent, and that they were seen as a particularly strong threat to the traitor cause. But looking at the numbers, it's all smoke and mirrors. They only really had around 100,000 legionnaires, and it's also stated that their warriors weren't actually any better than any others. They might look scary, but I think they're only a C. Contrast this with the Imperial Fists. They also had around 100,000 legionnaires, which would put them in C2 if it wasn't for their fleet. The Imperial Fist fleet numbered around 1,500 ships, which even at conservative estimates puts their number of capital ships at 3 or 4 times that of some other legions. And it was led by the ancient star fortress, the Phalanx. Plus, of course, at the start of the heresy, they were fortified in the solar system. Imperial Fists in a...
So they had the largest navy out of any of the Space Marines, and that makes a big difference too. I wonder if that's also something you like factors in, is like, you know, armored units, tanks, you know, mechs, titans, etc., etc. That's also part of this, because, you know, if you have enough titans, those titans can make up for obviously numbers of Astartes. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a big deal.
In a defensive position, unlike the Wolves of Fenris, that is a tangible upgrade, and I'm going to put them in B. Right, the Night Lords were a difficult one to gauge. At the end of the heresy, they were renegade in all but name, and they've been away from the centers of power for ages, so estimates place their strength at between 90 and 120,000 legionnaires, but for various reasons, it's entirely possible they were bigger than that. I'm going to err on the larger number here and say that they're one of the more powerful of the C tier, possibly veering their way near to a B tier. And the Blood Angels had a similar strength, 120,000 warriors, and one of the most glorious reputations of any of the legions. But we're not measuring reputations here, only strength. And the reason the Angels get a bump up is, again, fleet size. They had an estimated 300 capital ships, and though they had limited support vessels for all those, it's enough to push them out of C and firmly into the B tier.
Gotcha.
Now, the Iron Hands fare similarly to many of the others. They were one of the stars of the early Crusade, but by the point of the heresy, that star had started to wane. And their numbers topped out at around 113,000 with 100 capital vessels. But they were extremely well supplied with lots of the most modern armor, weaponry, and systems, second only to...
And I think they were also very capable at repairing and maintaining their own stuff out in the field. Meaning they didn't have to, you know, fall back to other systems for repairs as often. They could push on longer in the Crusade, from my understanding. I could be wrong about that, though.
The Iron Warriors. They're a difficult one. I think they could be at C or B. I'm going to be generous and put them in the B tier, but, you know, up for debate. Anyway, while the last 2 legions scrape their way into the B tier for various reasons, the World Eaters don't need a fleet to get them there. They only ever had around 70 capital ships, but even after 200 years of brutal attrition warfare and horrendous losses, they still numbered a healthy 150,000 legionnaires with a lot of support from Titan legions and Mechanicum. they're firmly in the B tier. Right,
Firmly.
here's the really big one. The
Yep.
Ultramarines were late starters in the Crusade, but the organizational skill of their Primarch, their massive recruitment base, and their very stable gene seed had all contributed to a very large and powerful legion. At the start of the Heresy, the Ultramarines were, by any measure, the largest legion, numbering somewhere between 200 and 250,000
Damn.
legionnaires alongside massive auxiliary forces.
They also had the largest territory. I think still have the largest overall territory of governance, if that's what you want to call it, right? Than any of the other legions. So it only makes sense that they would also be able to have more troops because they could recruit from more worlds. And obviously, like they said, with a more stable gene seed, it makes the recruiting process, their percentage of recruits actually making it through the process is that much higher. So it only makes sense.
Their fleet was also extensive, as you might expect, but it was mostly made up of smaller craft. They only had around 30 capital ships, but even so, their numbers alone make them the second legion to go in the S tier.
That kind of surprises me that they had so little capital ships compared to others. Maybe it's just a situation where the capital ships were too expensive for them to maintain, or maybe it was just how they were tactically. You know, they preferred to have smaller, lighter, faster craft than having, you know, larger capital ships in combat. You know, maybe they prefer to use their numbers and board ships and stuff like that instead of actually just like, you know, battling out on gun lines or whatever in space against other ships, etc. I don't know.
Right, onto the Death Guard. Mortarion had organized his legion optimistically. Their official Grand Company system had places for almost 500,000 warriors, but they never actually grew to that size. They only really ever recruited from one planet, so despite their famed endurance, a campaign of hellish environments and attrition warfare means they only had around 95,000 legionnaires and a respectable fleet at 70 capital vessels. I'm going to say they scraped their way into C tier. And so we reach the smallest of the legions. Gene seed stability problems had always racked the Thousand Sons, and even by the outbreak of the Heresy, they were still by far the smallest legion. They only had 80 to 85,000 legionnaires riding around in just 40 capital ships. I know they're all space wizards, but that's still a D. Now, the Sons of Horus, as you might expect, were in quite a good position going into the war they actually chose to start. They maintained a pretty healthy strength of between 130 to 170,000 legionnaires, which is like mid to strong, but we also have to account for the Horus effect. Not only were the Sons of Horus really well supplied and armed going into this, they also...
Yeah, I was going to say, like, he had the most, from my understanding, he had the highest amount of like Terminator armors and like heavier equipment than any other legion had, and utilized them very well. So I mean, like, Terminator armors literally make Astartes just walking almost nearly invulnerable, you know, tanks. That just enhances their abilities even more. They give up movement for being virtually indestructible. So like, that would make a big difference as well, having a lot more squadrons, platoons, legions, whatever you want to call them, of Terminator armors compared to just regular Astartes, you know what I mean? Plus, being the War Master and in charge of the war, he'd be able to requisition himself all the best gear, I would think, anyway.
Also had artifact. Not only were the Sons of Horus really well supplied and armed going into this, they also had arguably the greatest of the Primarchs at their head. Their size alone would happily land them in B, but I think in terms of their actual threat level, they get upgraded to A tier. And the word bearers, for different reasons, get a similar jump. After their admonishment early in the Crusade for being, well, religious nutcases, they'd grown their numbers, officially clocking in at around 140,000 legionnaires. But that was a lie. The word bearers had been planning for this longer than anyone else, and they knew they'd have to fight their hated enemy, the Ultramarines. So they'd been recruiting like
Sons of
crazy, and
bitches.
their actual numbers were closer to 180 or 190,000. As well as
So
this,
close to
they'd
that S tier
overtly
rank.
expanded their fleet, possibly to a size comparable to the Imperial Fists, but of smaller vessels backed up by a few large super weapons. They're the biggest of the traitor legions, and easily a high A tier. I think probably just short of S.
Okay.
The 18th Legion, though, the Salamanders, had never been that large. They only ever grew very slowly during the Crusade and were known as one of the smallest legions with a comparably sized fleet.
I think also one of the big things of the Salamanders, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but they were very compassionate towards just regular people. They were very, their whole like philosophy was really about protecting and serving regular humans, from what I understand. So a lot of potential tactics and whatnot they would use in war, depending on what's going on, but they would potentially give up better strategic positions and things like that in order to protect, normal humans in situations where they had to, where like humans were in the middle of crossfire or firefight or getting caught in war zones or whatever. So the Salamanders would, like I said, sacrifice position and tactical advantage in order to protect them, to my understanding. So that also like could cost them greatly as well. Anyway.
Estimates in the Crusade and were known as one of the smallest legions with a comparably sized fleet. Estimates suggest they could field around 89,000 legionnaires, which puts them in the D tier, along with the next legion,
definitely one of the smallest
Raven
ones.
Guard. Again, one of the smaller legions, though.
It makes sense. I feel like it makes sense that the Raven Guard be one of the smaller ones because of their kind of like more specialized tactics and stealth and like stealth, ambush, hit and run tactics. So I wouldn't think they would want to really necessarily field a larger, legion than some of the other Astartes, or would need a larger one.
Along with the next legion, the Raven Guard. Again, one of the smaller legions, though remarkably cohesive and well supplied, the Raven Guard could only field around 81,000 legionnaires. Now, there's a bit of an unknown quantity here. Many of the original Terran members of the 19th have been sent off in nomad predation fleets because Corax didn't like their tactics, and they were patrolling the very borders of the galaxy. But since they never really came back and did anything during the Heresy, I don't think we can really count them as part of their strength. The Raven Guards stay down in the D tier. And finally, the hardest legion to measure, the Alpha Legion. Official estimates have them at 90,000 legionnaires, but we all know that that's a lie. The Alpha Legion very deliberately hid their strength from both their allies and their enemies throughout the Great Crusade, but it's known that they were remarkably well equipped, and given how many actions they took
very
part in,
tactically
a
sound,
more
from what I
realistic
understand.
estimate places them at around 180,000 legionnaires, with a very large fleet, but which, like the Ultramarines, was mostly made up of smaller craft. Even so, our final legion goes into A.
So ending here, essentially, during the Crusade, before the Heresy really started, Ultramarines, Dark Angels, Alpharius's legions, Word Bearers, I think. I don't know the names of all of these legions based off just the symbols here, but, from what I know of the different legions, I would pretty much agree with all of these so far. The only thing I would say again is it's like I don't know how many legions had more, dreadnoughts, Terminator armors, Titans, if they fielded Titans, because that makes a big difference as well. It seems like he's basing it mostly on troop numbers and like naval vessel numbers. So let me know down in the comments if you guys think this is correct from what he's saying so far. But I guess let's go on to the second half, where he's going to talk about, I guess, during the height of the Heresy or after the Heresy, where things might change.
So there we are. Looking at this, you can really see why Horus moved the Loyalist legions around so much in the run-up to the Heresy. The most powerful legions, the Dark Angels and Ultramarines, were both Loyalists, and both assigned to the far-away fringes of the galaxy, along with other threats like the Blood Angels, leaving only much smaller legions in the heart of the Imperium ready to respond to Istvan. Even the Space Wolves being sent to fight the Thousand Suns at Prospero seems like a fortuitous thing for the War Master. The two legions were both on the smaller side and capable of inflicting a lot of damage on each other. The initial battles of the Heresy, engineered by Horus, really changed this tier list. First off, the Space Wolves assault Prospero, and with the support of the Custodes and Sisters of Silence, they almost destroyed the Thousand Suns. Estimates place the 15th Legion at only a few thousand remaining. So it looks like we've now got an F tier for those that are probably too small to really compete. Then the 4 initial traitor legions purged themselves of their own loyalists on Istvan III, and a few of them suffered greatly from that. The World Eaters lost a quarter of their number there, dropping them down to around 115,000 and into tier C, and the Emperor's Children did even worse, dropping down to only around 60,000 and well into tier D. But the Death Guard and the Sons of Horus seem to have fared a lot better and probably remain where they were. When the Imperium then responded, it dispatched 7 legions to Istvan V, but 4 of these turned traitor and gunned down the other 3 at the Drop Site Massacre. In this,
I think the Salamanders and the Raven Guard took major losses during that.
Almost the entire Raven Guard and Salamander's legions were wiped out, with the remaining strength being about 4,000 for the Raven Guard and around 6,000 for the Salamanders, moving them both down into the F tier. The third Loyalist Legion, the Iron Hands, are a bit harder to rank. They were so impetuous that their vanguard dropped down before the majority of the Legion caught up. So although they were destroyed, the Legion as a whole didn't suffer as heavy losses as the Raven Guard or Salamanders did. But they did lose their Primarch in that assault. He was the
killed by
first to
Fulgrim.
die, and they were a particularly bad Legion for that to happen to. So while the loss of numbers pushes them down to a tier C, the fact that they were reduced to guerrilla warfare anyway, barely able to operate as a Legion anymore, pushes them further down the list. Even though they technically still had numbers, they're probably a D tier in terms of threat. Finally, during the battle at Calth, the Word Bearers ambushed the Ultramarines and, to be honest, did it really well. Of the maybe 250,000 Ultramarines, around 200,000 had mustered at Calth, and after the battle, only around 40,000 remained there.
Wow.
Which means the Ultramarine strength spread out across the galaxy was only around 90,000. The remnants were all still really well
some big
organized and
losses.
supplied though, and they were able to recruit quickly from their Ultramar empire, so I'm going to drop them down to C tier. And there we are. A tier list for the legions at the outbreak of the heresy, and after Horus's opening moves had played out, evening the playing field a bit for the...
It's interesting that the Dark Angels stayed up there at S tier. I thought they had lost a lot as well over time from various wars that they had gone through, because they were kind of at the vanguard of the Crusade. And also because as time went on, other legions got more priority over a lot of better gear and equipment, and eventually the gear and equipment that they had wasn't quite up to par from my understanding. Maybe I'm incorrect about that, but it's interesting that they're still they're the only legion really that is still S tier. Interesting. So yeah. And so what I think all the A tier ones were traitor legions, right? I might be mistaken, but I think these are all traitor legions. So this is the only loyalist legion that's like at the top of the tier lists. So you have these 3, loyalist factions. You got 2 B and an S versus 4 A tier. So yeah, I don't know. Interesting.
The traitors. Most of the loyalist legions at this point were on the back foot, and the only ones with significant numbers remaining far off on the other side of the galaxy. Well done, Horus, I guess.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
I mean, yeah, that just goes to show how smart Horus was with moving troops around, and obviously he had the advantage of knowing he was going to turn traitor and prepare and set things up and stage stuff with talking with the other legions, getting other legions to turn, like he said, pushing some of the stronger legions out to the edges of the galaxy so they'd be further away, wouldn't be able to intervene necessarily in time in certain events, and then staging everything that happened at Isstvan 5. So yeah, it worked out pretty well for him for the most part. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Another great video by Arbitor Ian.
One of these videos, well, there's probably a little box there just on the right coming up, and if you'd like to see some of these videos a bit earlier or support the channel generally, well, there's a Patreon link below. See ya.
See ya, brother. All right. Well, like I said, another great video by Arbitor Ian. As always, links down below in the description, info section, whatever you want to call it, for this original video without my commentary here, and for Arbitor Ian's channel. Let me know if you guys agree with the end of this video, where you would say these legions are during before the heresy started, and essentially after the heresy took place. Let me know if you agree with them. If you think other legions should have been placed a little higher, maybe some a little bit lower. Again, I don't necessarily really know enough about numbers that the legions had, but also equipment. Like I said, from what I understand, Horus fielded a lot of Terminator armor squads, so that would definitely make a difference in a lot of engagements. I don't know who had utilized a lot more dreadnoughts potentially, or who utilized maybe more Titans and various classes of Titans, etc. So all of that can make a big difference in shoring up certain numbers. You know, like if you only have 90,000 overall troops, but you've got, you know, numerous Titans and other large, you know, armored units, mechanized units. That's the word I was looking for, is mechanized. That could, you know, make up for a lot of those numbers, and then also depending on the situation of the battle and the tactics that you can employ. So anyway, but yeah, let me know what you guys think, if at the end of the video that's correct. But I appreciate you guys hanging out and watching this video with me. I definitely enjoy hanging out with you guys, and I appreciate all the love and support. The channel's been growing great lately, and if you like this video, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and it helps the channel grow. If you would also do me a favor and click the join button down below and just take a look at the YouTube membership tiers and see if any of the benefits and tiers have any kind of interest to you. I do a book club stream every Friday where we go over the current book that I'm reading in the 40k universe. Currently, I'm still on the first book on the Horus Heresy, but I've gone through the first 9 chapters and reviewed them so far. So we're going to do chapters 10, 11, and 12 this coming Friday. And I also do a lot of these reactions live for some of my YouTube members, and we just have a lot of discussions as we go along, and then talk about some things, you know, off recording, I guess you could say, after I do some of the reactions. So if you want to come and hang out while we, you know, do some of these reactions and join in some of the discussions, you know, again, take a look at those membership tiers and see if any of those that'd be interesting. But for now, I just appreciate you guys hanging out, watching the video, and yeah, just giving a like and a sub. Greatly appreciate it. Hope you're having yourself a wonderful day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.